Welcome back. You're watching our continuing coverage here on CNBC-TV18. One of the big stories coming in from the G20 summit that is currently underway here in the capital is the inclusion of the African Union as a permanent member. This is something that India has pushed for. In fact, let me just read out Prime Minister Modi's tweet, advancing a more inclusive G20 that echoes the aspirations of the global south. We extend a heartfelt welcome to the President of the African Union. Thrilled to have the African Union as a permanent member, a milestone for the G20 family. As I pointed out, this has been something that's been work in progress, and it's one of the big milestone announcements that's come in. Joining me now to talk about the implications and the significance of this development is a man who knows Africa well, Sunil Bharti Mittal. Thank you very much for joining us here on CNBC TV18. As I pointed out, you know Africa well. Airtel Africa services 14 countries within the continent. You've called Africa the continent of hope, Mr. Mittal. As the chair of the B20 that looked at India-Africa economic integration, explain to us how significant this development is.
I think first of all, I must congratulate the Prime Minister for having led this charge of getting attention towards those who have been left behind in the global order. Today's inclusion of African Union as a permanent member of G20, which today has become one of the most important bodies globally, signals that you cannot leave large continents like Africa behind. They need to be a part of the main table. They need to be part of the decision-making process, and they need to be part of the forums that decide the new world order. So to that extent, I would say getting 1.3 billion people's voice on the table has become an absolute must, and which, to my mind, was a miss for all these years. As soon as India took over the G20 presidency, one of the major tasks that the Prime Minister took upon himself was to get consensus around including African Union as a permanent member. And I'm so glad that this has finally been agreed by all the members.
Yes, it is a big development indeed, Mr. Mittal. But let's talk about the importance in terms of economic development from here on and tangible next steps. You have called Africa the continent of hope. You believe that in order for us to be able to address global challenges, including food security, the involvement of Africa is going to be significant. As the chair of the B20 that looked at specific recommendations, what would you suggest would be the tangible next steps?
Well, first and foremost, I think as now part of G20, Africa will start to now have a voice. And one of the major areas of discussions has to be the development, the economic development of Africa as a whole. As we know that Africa is endowed with all the critical minerals and metals that the world needs today for its transformation from from a carbon emitting energy to electric vehicles to all the new forms of renewable energy. Those minerals and metals are all available in Africa in abundance. Just purely extracting them out of Africa, taking them into other countries is not helping the continent. You have to set up factories, you have to set up value-added supply chains in the country and the continent to make Africa economically more resilient. Even more important is today the food security. 65% of the world's uncultivated land lies in Africa. 300 days of sunshine, olive soil on the Congo Basin, and all other areas of Africa, even if exploited by 10%, can feed the whole world. You need to therefore focus on Africa's agriculture and, importantly, again, value-added agriculture produce. So these will be, to my mind, the two areas on which Africa will agitate and debate with the global leaders as to how large investments can be directed towards Africa. US has already woken up, committed $55 billion. India, which has had historic links with Africa, is stepping up its engagement with most of the countries in Africa to ensure that Africa industrialization and economic integration accelerates.
Well, Staying with the issue of economic integration, and you talked about the economic resilience of the continent, Mr. Mittal, especially through the course of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have seen large parts of Africa become even more vulnerable when we talk about debt vulnerability specifically. How much of a challenge is that going to be, and how do you believe the global world order, multilateral institutions, global leaders will need to address the debt vulnerability that Africa finds itself facing today?
Well, my recommendation would be that we have to wipe the slate clean. Africa, as you are rightly pointing out, and many of those countries are in debt traps. Even countries like Zambia, which were having tremendous amount of deposits of copper and were doing reasonably well, have fallen into huge debt traps. Countries which are oil-producing countries like Angola, Gabon, and many others are also in huge debt. And this needs a reset. To my mind, a debate must ensue amongst the global leaders how to write off most of these loans once and reset Africa into the next order. By giving large amounts of debt, for example, from China, and then securing long-term supply chains on critical minerals and metals, oil and gas, Africa has been deprived of continuous income that is required to build their own infrastructure, healthcare, education, and infrastructure. So to that extent, if the debt trap is not lifted in most of the African countries, I don't think so the world can achieve its objective of putting Africa on economic momentum.
Well, that's an important point that you make, but also a contentious one, this reset that you speak of, Mr. Mittal. We will have to see whether there is a path forward on this crucial issue. But let me talk specifically about India and Africa. As you pointed out, legacy ties, long historical association. But from your vantage point today of someone who has been dealing with Africa, has a large investment in Africa, what do you believe could be potentially the areas of partnership, of future investment, and of future collaboration as well? What would be the imperatives to drive the India-Africa relationship?
Well, I think the flagship engagement really would be the DPI, the Digital Public Infrastructure. India has demonstrated how, in the absence of hard infrastructure, which can take many decades to build and requires hundreds of billions of dollars, which Africa neither has the luxury of time nor the money, can use to its advantage the India model of digital public infrastructure. You read the report from the G20 that what was expected to be achieved in India in terms of financial inclusion in 47 years has been achieved in 8 or 9 years. This is the power of digital public infrastructure. I was glad to hear the Nigerian President Tinubu talking about it, adopting that model into Nigeria, one of the most populous nations in Africa. If most of African nations can adopt the DPI for the benefit of its citizens, to my mind, they will be able to provide financial inclusion, direct benefit transfers to their citizens, importantly ensure that the government services, whether it's in the area of health or public services, can be delivered at the most frugal cost in a most efficient manner. To my mind, this will be the biggest area of engagement between India and the African continent. Of course, there'll be multiple other tracks of setting up manufacturing there. We can see tire manufacturers from India going there, cement manufacturers, steel manufacturers. There's a flurry of activity at the industrial level also. But the flagship program where Indian government can play its role is in the DPI.
Mr. Mittal, you're right in pointing out that DPI, or digital public infrastructure, could potentially be one of the big focus areas of a potential partnership between India and Africa. And the DPI story is being showcased here at the Bharat Mandapam, which is where I'm currently at. Of course, the RBI Innovation Pavilion is showcasing what we've been able to do in terms of the JAM Trinity and more recently with UPI. None of this would have been possible without the backbone of telecom infrastructure, Mr. Mittal, as well as the fact that we've been able to drive down costs so significantly, data consumption going through the roof at the lowest prices anywhere in the world. How do you see this evolving from here on?
Well, very clearly, you've rightly pointed out the digital connectivity is the foundation on which DPI rests itself, and that we have been able to serve the nation even during COVID, when there were massive shifts of traffic from urban to rural areas and from offices to homes. Clearly suggests that any place that puts out DPI for the benefit of its society and citizens will need a robust telecom connectivity. Thankfully, Africa has done well in this regard. It needs to, of course, do a lot more, because the proliferation of telecom networks in Africa are still limited, unlike India, where you can have telecom networks in every nook and corner. Africa needs to do that. And for that, especially for large countries like Democratic Republic of Congo and countries like Uganda, Zambia, Tanzania, will need to do a lot more rollouts of telecom networks, in which we as telecom players will have to play a role, learning from our Indian example. But as far as India is concerned, there is a tremendous amount of platforms that are being built over the last many years and continue to do so. India's rollout in 5G, as you know, is legendary. It's the fastest rollout. The feverish activity on laying fiber across the country is also, I would say, absolutely astounding. So you're right. A very, very strong, robust network, telecom network is required for DPI to succeed. And I'm sure Africa, when it builds this DPI program, will also see that the telecom networks are spreading out to every part of their own countries.
So just to follow up to that, Mr. Mittal, as you said, you will take lessons from the rollout experience in India, but more importantly, the lessons that you've learned with your experience of actually investing in Africa. And as you see the potential for growth, the headroom for growth, what could that mean going forward as far as Airtel Africa is concerned?
Well, we remain very bullish on Africa, African growth. I mean, Africa has been growing for Airtel at 20%. Every year in constant currency, which is absolutely stunning growth for a company that you can double in about 4 years' time, your total revenue. The only problem in Africa has been currency depreciation. Take the case of Naira, which was at 460 before President Tinubu came in. He immediately floated the Naira, and we are now staring at 850, 900 Naira to a dollar. So in terms of currency depreciation, it's a matter of great worry, and as the economies of Africa will stabilize, so would the currencies. But the growth rates are absolutely astounding. There is so much more to be done in Africa. Africa is where India was 15, 20 years back. So I remain very, very enthusiastic about African growth, and we will keep on investing more and more into the African networks.
Mr. Mittal, you talked about the big opportunity and the rollout that we've seen as far as 5G is concerned. Part of the meeting here at the G20, there's been a flurry of bilateral meetings as well, and one that happened last night with President Biden and Prime Minister Modi, building on the conversations which include, of course, the partnership on critical and emerging technologies, as well as 5G and 6G collaboration. Now, how significant is that partnership really going to be as we talk about this further build out of the 5G, 6G, potential 6G story?
I think this is a very important development. India being on the high table of setting standards for the next generation of telecom technologies is a first. India has always been a follower as far as telecom technologies are concerned. It's had a very small voice in the overall ITU and GSMA system. But with India now clearly planting its flag to say we will now be a part of the next standard setting of the telecom technology, especially in 6G, and now collaborating with the US in this regard is a very, very important turning of event in my mind. And to that extent, I personally feel that we should see Indian manufacturing platforms getting definitely momentum because of this. Our patent filing will increase. Our engineers will start to look at, participating in the 6G standards. So there will be a variety of activities. And with the US, India coming together, I think this particular symbiotic relationship will force, to my mind, the direction of the future of telecom technologies away from some of the existing powerful countries like China, who had taken a big lead in the 4G and 5G space.
You know, since we are talking about the India-US partnership, especially in the areas of telecom and technology, Mr. Mittal, you know, on the G2G side, we've of course seen India and the US forge an agreement on building out the semiconductor partnership, and that seems to be playing out on the private side as well. More importantly, on the developments that we're seeing with respect to AI, the NVIDIA CEO here in India inking an agreement with Reliance as well as the Tatas. How do you see the AI story, the semiconductor story, and is there potentially a role that Bharti would like to play in either of these areas?
Well, clearly, you know, that most of these companies are now looking at India, whether it's in the area of semiconductors or in the area of AI, suggests two things. One, that India is now important in the global affairs of these technology platforms. And importantly, it's a trusted country where technologies, especially very critical technologies, can be transferred safely and securely. And the countries like US and all are encouraging their companies to come to India. On the second part is that you need serious investments, you need subsidies when you're setting up semiconductors. India has opened up massive PLI program for all these areas, but importantly, India is also knocking very hard on the doors of US to see if India could be included in the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act alliance, where, for example, Japan has been brought in, which would mean that American companies setting up shops in India would be able to secure subsidies from the US under the IRA as well. That is an area where I have personally also been involved from various platforms. I hope that gets done. That will ensure that a lot of technology companies from the US can come up and set up shops here in India as if they were setting up in the US. And lastly, as to Bharti's, the question on Bharti, we ally with technology companies. We don't manufacture anything ourselves, but we are in deep partnership. And in that whole process, we ideate with them. We work collaboratively with people and then ensure that the services that come out of these processes are put to the service of our customers. So we remain very, very closely associated with these companies.
You know, Mr. Mittal, if I could just pick up on the point that you made as far as the Inflation Reduction Act that the US, the Biden administration has taken forward, and the implications and the impact of that for markets like ours specifically. You know, in terms of technology, this has already been an area where both sides have seen a fair degree of partnership. In fact, you've got every US tech company setting up base here in India, and outside of the home country, perhaps the largest employer base, patents being filed out of India as well. What do you see as the next, phase of this relationship? What could it potentially mean in terms of investments, in terms of IP, in terms of innovation?
Well, as I said, right now the investments that are coming in, I mean, if you see there's a large degree of employment in India, but the investments in dollar terms are small because these are companies like IBM having 50,000 people working in India, or Accenture, or other major global businesses having very large employment, destinations in various parts of the country. But these are not heavy investments, this part is welcome, and we will continue to welcome more and more foreign companies to come up and set up their back offices and centers here. Under the IRA, what changes is serious, large investments, multi-billion dollars of investment, tens of billions of investments into semiconductor manufacturing, into various other technology manufacturing platforms, which require very large amounts of money. Today, US under the IRA give very large amounts of money to companies to set up those shops in the US, which deprives countries like India to draw those large dollars here. If we become a part of under the IRA as an ally of US, under the IRA part, then of course these companies can be encouraged to bring their investments into India as if they were setting up in the US. That is what Japan has got, you see, and that's what India, I hope, can get in the coming years.
Right. Mr. Mittal, it's very rare that we actually get a chance to have a conversation with you. So let me end by asking you about, again, another potential area of global partnership where India is hoping to play a crucial, pivotal role, especially in light of what we've seen happen with the Chandrayaan. And that is a space that, quite literally, no pun intended, that you're interested in as well. How do you see this evolving and building out?
Well, I think space has been an amazing story for the country in the last few years. India, of course, has been developing its space programs since very early on after independence. Our two launches for my own company, OneWeb, were grand successes. They were the first two, in some sense, experimental launches on GSLV Mark III, which were both successful, absolutely flawless execution. They're the same rocket that did the Chandrayaan mission recently, which has become a global talking point that for $74 million, India has been able to land, its own vehicle on the southern pole of Moon. It's been an incredible achievement. I've gone around the world. People are talking about it. They are absolutely astounded what India has achieved in a very low-cost way. And this is India's beauty. We do things which are absolutely high-tech, world-class, at a very low-cost base. US, for example, would have spent billions of dollars for the same mission. To that extent, I would say India is now one of the space powers. It needs to step up its launches. It should become the launch destination of the world, especially after Roscosmos Soyuz program has now gone out of the world equation. Nobody will or can use Soyuz program. It gives an opportunity to India to start becoming the launch destination for the globe, other than the US, which is the only other program that is going on under SpaceX. So I would say launch a week should be our ambition, 52 launches a year of rockets, hopefully one day reusable rockets like SpaceX. We should start to do more activities on the Moon and Mars and other planets, and possibly be a part of the space station in a bigger way, along with the US, given our now friendship with the US, that we have our astronauts experimenting, working on the space station as well.
So given the fact that you believe that we have not just the audacity of hope, but also the audacity of execution in space and space exploration now, Mr. Mittal, what could it potentially mean in terms of your own aspirations?
Well, as far as we are concerned, as you know, we have taken a pole position in the broadband communication from space. Our first constellation is up and running now, providing services to most parts of the world. We are waiting for the services to arrive in India by, I hope, by October, November, we'll be fully ready, waiting for government permissions to start showcasing what broadband satellite with low latency can do for Himalayas, for deserts, for forests, for critical areas in the Indian Ocean. And that is the step we have already taken. We'll keep on fortifying that. We have started to build and plan our Gen 2 now, which will have more capacity, more features. So this is a journey we have taken very early on. It's a pioneering activity. There are only two constellations in the world, OneWeb and Starlink, which are providing these services. So we remain very enthusiastic. I personally am spending a lot of time in this area. And I'm so glad that India, as a nation, is now on the forefront of space technologies and space missions.
All eyes on India as it concludes its G20 presidency and hands over to Brazil. The India resilience, the India economic story, of course, is also being showcased here. How would you sum up the India moment as of today, Mr. Mittal? What do you believe foreign investors, global leaders will take away from the India story today?
Well, very clearly, India's message is a very, very appropriate message for today's world. World is one family. This particular slogan that has been given by India to the world, I hope gets echoed and adopted at this G20. This will be, to my mind, the most important work that G20 can spread around the world. Today, Honorable Prime Minister's opening speech was around the same theme, that world has never been more fractured, there's never been more deficit of trust. All this needs to be bridged. We need to come together as a world. We need to help each other. Importantly, those people in the global south who have been left behind need to be lifted out of their poverty, because without having the sentiment of the world is one family, we will get more and more fragmented. To that extent, I think what India would achieve out of G20, regardless of what final declaration comes out, one resounding message to the world is, we are all one family. Let's not look after selfish interests, but look at global interests, and in which everybody must have a place, everybody must be heard, debated, issues discussed, and deliveries done across the world for every person who lives on this earth. I think that, to my mind, is a message that India would have showcased, and importantly, would be remembered, to my mind, for a long, long period of time. And let me end by saying, I have been to 4 G20s. There are side shows, there are side events, there are one event in a country, it comes and goes. India has changed the face of G20. There's never been a G20 like this before, and to my mind, perhaps there never will one be in the future.
Mr. Mittal, it's always a pleasure speaking with you. We truly appreciate you taking time out to speak with us today on a whole host of issues, and of course the big announcement that's come in on an issue that I know you have been championing as well, is the inclusion of the African Union as a permanent member of the G20. Appreciate your time. Thank you very much for joining us here on CNBC TV18. That is Sunil Bharti Mittal here speaking to us on CNBC TV18. We will take a break and continue our coverage of the G20. Back in a moment with a lot more.